Budapest, and we're going to look at a timeline. This is the crown of St. Stephen. It was the crown worn by the kings of Hungary, and eventually it becomes part of the Habsburg, one of their titles as well. I love this because this bent cross on the top is part of it. Apparently they slammed it in the 17th century, slammed it, the top on it too hard and bent it, and then they felt like maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. And so it has this bent cross at the top, and when you see it reproduced on things later, you can always tell the Hungarian crown because the cross is bent off to the left. But the crown of St. Stephen was the symbol of the kings of Hungary. All right, so I divided this into early and late history, and we can stop at the end of the early history if you want me to. But again, like Vienna, like some of the other cities, the Romans are going to begin a permanent establishment there. Then they're going to be run out by the Huns. And the Huns, remember, were horsemen. And one of the things about Hungary that is very appealing to migratory groups is it is a plain. It's a great grassy plain. You cross over and you get into Austria, you start getting into the mountains, into the Alps. You go south towards Rome. The Huns had to cross mountains there. Horsemen don't necessarily like mountainous terrain, and so the Huns, for example, turn around after they get to Rome, and they turn back around and they settle in this big green grassy bowl that is the most of Hungary. Some of the greatest horsemen in Europe were Hungarians, and so the Hungarian cavalry was famed across Europe. Okay, Arpad is one of their founders. He's the one who founds the Hungarian dynasty. I'm going to show you this in just a minute. Then they're conquered by the Mongols. Mongols, we know from European history, the Golden Horde went as far as Hungary, and then they turned around and stayed in Russia. Matthias Corvinus is one of their great kings. He is the one who brings the Renaissance and begins to westernize Hungary. Then after that, the Turks will conquer Hungary. So there are all these influences of Asia and Europe in Budapest. And finally, the Habsburgs will conquer the Turks and drive them out of Hungary. And so this is the kind of a summary of the early history. So we'll just look at this kind of really quickly. And this is a Roman arch, again, just to show you. We can see some of this in Budapest. In the first centuries, the Romans found a settlement known as Aquicum, the largest town of the Danubian region. Okay, so the Romans are here, and we can see a little bit of that when we go. Then the Huns arrive, okay, in the 5th century, and Attila the Hun, builds a city for himself here, and then his children and heirs kind of fight over some control of the tribes. And then Arpad is one of the Huns who emerges as the leader of the Hungarians, and so this is the dynasty in the 9th century that will begin to rule Hungary. Okay, and he settles in the town of Attila, which is the old Roman settlement. Okay, now the Mongols came after the Huns and kind of drove the Huns out. And remember, when we studied, those of you who are in European history, the history of Russia, the Golden Horde was very influential in Russia. Well, they actually swung up into Hungary, and I'm looking for where, up here into Hungary. And so they too have an influence in the development, and the people of Hungary in some ways are descended not only from the Huns, the Europeans, the Germans that settled there, but also the Mongols as well. All right, and again, horsemen, they're drawn to that grassiness and the great openness of central and eastern Hungary. Okay, Matthias Corvinus was one of their most important kings because he, like, if you remember, Ivan the Great, turns his face towards the west. He's very interested in the Renaissance. And he was elected by, they had kind of a gap in their inheritance, and so he was elected king, and apparently they met in the middle of the Danube to do this so that Buda and Pest were both recognized. And Buda becomes the main hub of the European Renaissance. He's very interested in Italy. He sends, as Ivan the Great did, sends for scholars and architects and so forth to come to Budapest and to Buda, his capital, and begin to build it up. Okay. Whoops. Should I go back like this? Okay. And then after this, and Buddha is becoming very Europeanized, the Suleiman the Magnificent comes in the 1520s at the time of Martin Luther, if you remember, and he conquers Hungary and gets within 80 miles of the gates of Vienna. So the Turks arrive in 1523. One of the things that the Turks love thermal baths, and Hungary has a lot of hot springs, so Budapest has a lot of hot springs, And so today you can still go to some of the baths that are built by the Turks, okay? So they conquer in 1523, they begin to develop Budapest as one of their capitals in 1541. So it's the beginning of the Ottoman occupation, and they build multiple mosques and baths in Budapest. So we can expect to see some Muslim architecture and influence of a little bit of Islam that's in Budapest today, particularly in Buda. Right. Okay. Now, in 1686, you remember that in 1683, the Turks attempted to take Vienna, and they lost, and they were driven backwards. And so the Habsburgs follow the Turks, and they take back Hungary in 1686. Buda and Pest are reconquered from the Turks with Habsburg leadership. Both towns are destroyed for the most part at this point, and then Buda and Pest are rebuilt. And this is where you get a lot of the Baroque architecture that you're going to see in Budapest, particularly in Buda, up on the Castle Hill. So that's, everybody has a little bit of a view of the old history. Okay, now we can stop here if you want. But the modern history, they settled in with the Habsburgs. They're part of the 1848 revolution. So those of you who were in European history, the Hungarians rose up against the Habsburgs and had to be put down with Russian aid, sort of a foreshadowing of the 20th century and the Russian presence with the Cold War in Hungary. In 1867, if you remember, they are offered equal status, and Budapest becomes an official capital of the Habsburgs. They have a capital in Vienna, they have a capital in Budapest, and this is what is known as the dual monarchy. They're both the Magyars of Hungary and the Germans of the Habsburgs are equal partners in the Habsburg rule after that compromise. 1919, Hungary got its independence from the Habsburg Empire, broke up, but it also followed the Soviet Union. One of the first Soviets formed outside of the Soviet Union was an early revolt in Hungary, and I'm going to show you the man's picture. They suffered occupation in 1944. The Hungarians, though, had already gone to dictatorship. Most of the countries of Europe went to dictatorships in between the two wars, but in 1944. And then they were reoccupied by the Soviet Union in 1945, which did not leave until 1989. And so Hungary is very famous for this uprising in 1956, but the Soviets sent in tanks. The Warsaw Pact had just been formed the year before, and the Soviet Union used the Warsaw Pact and their own troops to put down a very extensive uprising in Hungary in 1956 against the Soviet Union. The 1980s was a very prosperous time for Hungary. They're still under Soviet domination, but the Soviets are kind of backing off, and so it is a very prosperous time for them. And then in 1989, Hungary was the first country to take down their border, the border that had been imposed by the Soviet Union at the beginning of the Cold War. And in April of 1989, they began to cut down the barbed wire that separated Hungary from Austria. Not millions, but thousands of East Germans. They could travel in the Eastern Bloc pretty easily. East Germans came to Budapest and to other Hungarian cities, and then they would go through the Austrian border and back up to West Germany. So this was beginning to happen in April. If you remember, it was in November of that year, 1989, that finally the wall between East Germany and West Germany, or East Berlin and West Berlin, was taken down. But the Hungarians really kind of opened it up by having the courage to begin to dismantle their own border. So let me just show you just a few quick pictures, and then we'll be done with that, okay? Remember 1848, we had this attempt to overthrow the Habsburg rule, which is crushed with the aid of the Russians. Not fond of the Hungarians are not fond of the Russians before the Cold War. Okay, and this is the compromise. And don't you love the little bent crown right there? Okay, so we know this is the Hungarians, and this is the Austrians, and this is the dual monarchy of 1867. Okay, and then in 1919, this is Bela Kun. He was a communist, and as Marx said, it would be dominoes, and it would be start in one country and pass to another. And this is an attempted communist, well-established communist insurrection that was crushed by the Romanian army next door. So, and their independence was followed by revolution. The occupation of 1944, the Arrow Cross collaborated with the Germans, which is a Hungarian group, and there was an attempt to remove all of the Jews from Budapest at this time. At the time of the occupation, there were 184,000 Hungarian Jews survived 11 months of this. The Germans actually occupied Budapest as their war effort is falling apart. They no longer relied on allies, so they go to Germany, they go to Hungary, and they directly occupied, and this accelerated the Holocaust in Budapest. And then the next year, the Soviets show up as liberators and never leave. Okay, so they besiege Budapest, and the retreating Germans destroyed all the Danube bridges. So when we see them, these are all reconstructions of 19th century bridges. And World War II took the lives of close to 200,000 Budapest residents and caused widespread damage to the buildings of the city. And then in '56, you see where they've cut the hammer and sickle out of the Hungarian flag here, and this was an attempt to get the Soviets to go home and to have free elections in Hungary, and it didn't work. And it was crushed by the Soviet Union. Okay. 1980s, this is Castle Hill, isn't it pretty? And so again, looking down on Pest across the river. Okay, in 1987, Castle Hill and the banks of the Danube were part of, now we're going to several UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Krakow was in the first group, but this one, it was put in the 1980s. And finally in '89, the courage of the Hungarians to really kind of start this, taking down their border and allowing the East Germans to cross into Austria. Okay. Any questions? It's a really cool city. We're going to really enjoy the bridges and the river and the height that we can see and the views. And Parliament just dominates that eastern bank of the Danube.
Isn't this the city that's noted for its textiles?
Textiles.
Fabrics or?
All handcrafts, really. The word Pest means kiln, and the word Buda actually means furnace. So they have worked porcelains and clay there forever. So it's very, Hungarian crafts are very famous. They're very fine, very interested in their folk art. So, okay. Any questions? Okay, I'm done.
We're doing Vienna in a moment.
Oh, I'm doing Vienna. I'm just going to talk, okay, from pictures. Okay. Oh, then I need that.
Yeah. These are just a few pictures of Budapest. This is another map just showing Buda and Pest. Castle Hill. And just a map of that. There's going to be a lot of the major buildings we see are going to be here.
We climb in Buda. Pest is flat, but we're going to climb up and down. See, you're looking up at it from the river.
Few major museums here. But Ms. Hines will talk a little bit more about that. Hobbs. Who's that?
It's okay, it actually happens daily.
We're being recorded, so I'm not going to say anything. This is still part of the Castle Hill Christian Special.
It's an overlook of the name.
This is one of the most gorgeous cities, I think. The baths, Ms. Oliver was talking about.
This is on the Pest side, Euro Square.
And do you not remember what this is? Never mind.
The Opera House, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah.
Matthias is an important name, St. Matthias, and then Matthias Corvinus.
Inside. And then this was one of the major synagogues in the area that is renowned.
That's the Parliament. You look across from Buda, this is it. That's okay.
Right.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. We're just going to talk from pictures here, and we can talk more about Vienna as we go along. So, okay, that's the Hungarian. Go backwards on
Yep.
that. Okay, so Vienna is laid out. The Danube. This is the center of the city. The Stephansdom is the heart of Vienna, And the city walls of the old city went here in this circle around here. And in the 19th century, under the influence of Haussmann, when Haussmann was redoing Paris, the Austrians took down all the remnants, the little pieces of the old wall that was left, and they made this into a big fashionable boulevard. So where in Paris you have the Champs-Élysées, which is very straight. In Vienna you have the Ringstrasse, and it makes a ring. It starts over here on the Danube Canal here, and then it goes around. And this is kind of the heart of Vienna. This is the old city in the center, and then the newer suburbs were built out. But we'll walk on the Ringstrasse when we get there. But that's, if you just kind of think of this ring as the old city walls, and then in the 19th century it becomes the boulevard, and that's where the 19th century fashionable houses were and things like that. This is the old medieval center, and so we'll probably spend a lot of time in there as well. Okay, I'm going backwards. I'm not used to this one. Okay, the Musikverein. Vienna is a city of music. It's a city with opera. The one thing that's really interesting about Vienna is that you can see in Vienna 25 different operas. There are 20 different operas a month. They restage them over the year, but you could go to a different opera almost every night in Vienna. It's one of the great opera capitals of the world. The Musikverein is for symphonic music, and apparently it has one of the most perfect interiors for, I went to school with music nerds, you can tell. They would take us to these buildings and like touch the buildings. You know what this is? This is the Musikverein. And you know what? Inside here, apparently for, especially for symphonies, the perfect atmosphere for symphony is when you can get the music to linger in the air 2 seconds or something like that. The whole interior of this is wood, and it has that effect. He said that the music just blends. The piece, the note as it's leaving and the note as it comes in. At any rate, this is one of the holy grails of music, the Musikverein in Vienna. So we'll go look at the outside at least when we're there. But okay, I'm not very good at this thing. This is the interior of the Musikverein. Okay, you can see the organ when they play the pipe organ, but and then they have the concerts in there as well. All right, so you liked the Musikverein, didn't you?
It was pretty.
Okay.
That's cool.
But is that, what is the Vienna Opera House?
This is Vienna Opera House, the Staatsopera. Okay, and so this is on the corner of the Ringstrasse and Kärntnerstrasse, and this is where they have the operas. And another thing that you can do is you can go to the opera for 50 cents. I don't know, it's probably $1 now, but you could go for 50 cents if you stood. And they have these kind of rails for your elbows, but you couldn't get anything in advance. If you went Stehplatz, which means standing place, you could go, the 75-cent ones were really, they were right behind the most expensive seats in the opera, so you got all the music and all of that. And then for 50 cents, you got up in the high ones, and you could hang your elbows and just kind of listen to music. So you could go to opera cheaper than going to a movie when back in the day. I imagine nothing changes in Vienna. It's kind of like me. It's going to be probably the same as it was then. But anyway, this is the Staatsopera. This was for the nobles. There's the Volksopera, which is the People's Opera, which was built in the 19th century, which is out a little bit distance from this. But this was for the nobility and the upper class and all of that. But the common people got to go and listen to the and stand Stehplatz. Okay, so this is the Vienna Opera House. That's the interior. These are all the seats along the sides. This has the deepest stage in Europe, from what I understand. It goes way, way, way back, and they can do all kinds of divisions with it, and yet still maintain the sound of the opera. Here. Okay, am I going backwards or forwards? Okay, right across the street from the opera house, this is where the nobles stayed. They didn't have a townhouse in Vienna. This was a very high-end hotel, the Hotel Zocker. And the nobles would come and stay here, and then they would cross the street to go to the opera house. But it's still a hotel. We can see them when we go there, the Hotel Zocker here. Okay. And this is the front of the Zocker. Zocker has a cafe. They're very famous for a chocolate cake that's called Zocker Torte. You can get it in different places in the city, but this is where it originated, at the Hotel Zocker. Okay. Vienna is famous for pastry. Okay. This is the cake table in a place called Demmel's, and Demmel's is one of the most famous pastry houses in the world. And you go in, and a little lady, she's dressed in black, and she has a little white lace apron on, and she comes up, and you just point out the cake that you want, and tell her what kind of coffee, and then you go sit down and she brings it all to you. But at any rate, I just wanted you to see the variety. And this is not, there's a pastry shop every 2 streets in Vienna. So, and this is the Zuckertorte here, so that we can try that. Yeah, if you want, it's served all over the city, or we can go to the Hotel Zucker and pay way too much for it, whatever you guys decide. Okay? Okay. The Spanish riding school is an homage to an old cavalry. You know, cavalry officers are mounted on horses. And in battle, the horse has to follow your commands. And so years ago in Vienna, they took these cavalry moves and they put them to music. And this is a coordination. You can go and see this performance. But they actually, there's a movement called the airs above the ground, and the horse actually leaps in the air all 4 feet, and he kicks backwards. And the goal of that is to knock down anybody who's trying to attack you from the rear. But they have all, and they walk the kind of sideways. It's all to music. It's kind of incredible to see. The Spanish school, remember the Habsburgs came from Spain, and they married into the Spanish royal house. In Vienna, when you say that something is very elevated, very refined, it's in the Spanish style. So this is the Spanish riding school. But again, it's a sort of a, and these horses, they're called Lippinzahn horses. It's a breed that was bred for cavalry riding, and they still maintain a school, the Lippinzahn stables to breed these horses. Anyways, it's kind of a neat thing to do. I'm not thinking they do it in the summer. It's too hot to have these horses in the city. I think they're in pastures in the summer, so I don't know that we can go by there, and I think we can go in and look at the floor. It's a very posh, but you have a dirt floor for the horses to be able to move and do their things on. Okay. Someday I'll be, and this is the riding school again. Okay, and the horses here. All right, the Hofburg is Hof means court and Burg means city, and this was where the Habsburgs lived in Vienna, and it's also where their government was. So it's kind of like Versailles, but Versailles, I guess it's more like the Louvre was, where it was in town. So when the Habsburgs build their little Versailles, they don't have to build it as big. I like the Schönbrunn better because it was just for the family. This was close enough they could leave the government behind, and they didn't have to bring all of that out to their place where they like to relax. So their little version of Versailles is smaller than Versailles because they could leave the government here in the Hofburg. But the Hofburg is where the Habsburgs lived year-round. It's the court city. It's also the government city. It's now the National Library, and a lot of other national institutions are located. And there's a museum to the Habsburgs in here in the Hofburg. But this is a big plaza that's in front of it that you can walk across. Okay. Wrong, but... So again, this is all within the Hofburg. So they had their ballrooms and their kind of their hall of mirrors and places where they had state dinners, and all of that's inside the Hofburg. There's also the chapel where I don't know if you know about the Vienna choir boys. This is where they sing in the Hofkapelle, the palace chapel is where they sing. It may be something that we can do to hear them sing. Okay, so again, all part of the Hofburg. This is their palace that's now in town, but it was their country palace, and it's their kind of their little Versailles. This is called Schönbrunn, and this Maria Theresa and her 16 children used to go here and relax on the weekends. And this big hill back here is called the Gloriette, and there's a view of the city that you can see if you climb all the way up there. But and they're beautiful gardens behind. This is the front of the Schönbrunn. And again, we'll have our picture taken. We can all stand right here, but it is beautiful to go. And I think it's part of our tour, is it not, to go to Schönbrunn?
I believe so, yes.
I think so too. Okay. The Prater is where a lot of Viennese go on the weekends. In the summertime, it's gardens, and then there's like an amusement park, and it's just kind of a place for them to relax. This is the heart of Vienna, the Schönbrunn. It was believed years and years and years ago there was a spring here that was a pagan shrine. When the area became Christianized, they began to build. This is just a very old center of Vienna, Gothic cathedral. During the Second World War, though, this was bombed back to the Stone Age. All of this is reconstructed because Vienna was the first city of the Reich to fall. We bombed it from Italy, and the Russians came through from the east, and they fought fiercely here the Germans to hold on to it and the Russians to take it. And the city was virtually destroyed in that time period. The only thing that they could not reconstruct, the stone came from the same quarries, the tapestries were woven in the same areas, they tried everything, but they could not replace the stained glass windows. So when we go in there, you'll see that the windows, at least this is my memory, and my memory's not that old because I have been back a couple of times, but the stained glass windows are not there. They're just colored glass in the windows. Oh wait, that's that. That's that. Okay. All right, so again, the stepping stone. And so they only have one tower. They didn't complete the second tower. So you see. Okay, outside of the city of Vienna is another place. It's very nice. This is the people on Sundays particularly to get away from the city. They go out to the Vienna woods. This is full of vineyards. It's full of old castles. It's full of trees, and it's full of little restaurants that people go to kind of walk the trails a little bit, and then have a lunch or an early supper, and ride the streetcar back into the city. But it's it's bigger than Central Park, but it's that bit of greenness that people who live in cities seem to desire so much. But the Vienna woods are on outside of the city of Vienna, very close. All right.
I just put a few pictures in here. This is Budapest, the National Art Gallery in Budapest. I couldn't find anything like particular pieces that we have studied in class, but there are a lot of artists that you will have recognized their names. So I just put a few artists that you would know in here. These I don't need to know that we'll have time to go to the National Gallery in Budapest or want to, but these are some artist names that you may recognize.
Just say click.
Click. Okay. And then Gauguin and Goya. The piece on the right, the Goya on the right, is probably the most famous piece that I saw in that museum. That's a very famous piece from Romantic series that he did. But we studied Gauguin in class. And click. And then these are some earlier things. Again, not particular pieces that we studied, but things that we talked about with the red figure, face painting. I feel like I spelled something wrong there. And then the ancient Greece, that's Isis, who is the mother of Horus, who's the protector god, the protector of the people. So that's Isis nursing her son Horus. Okay, and that's okay.
You know, when the Austrians think about something that's romantic and exotic, they always think of Hungary. That's where the gypsies were. There's violin music. There's some great composers. Liszt and Haydn are Hungarian.
And there's lots of mosaics that
Right.
look like.
And then, again, I think you have the Turkish influence in that, you know, the Islamic pattern, and you see that in Budapest as well. And so they always, the Austrians almost, in a sense, completely romanticize Hungary. It's I would like us, I hope we might get to go to a restaurant where they have the violinist and they have the embroidered tablecloths. It's really sometimes some of them are in caves, and it's really an interesting place, and it's a beautiful city. So I'm really excited that we're going there. It is different from the rest of Europe because it is on that edge of that grassy plain that all of those Asian migratory, the horsemen, the Mongols and the Turks and the Huns all end up in Hungary because of their horses and the compatibility of their topography for horsemen. So maybe we'll see. And they stand in the saddle. I mean, they are really showy riders. So maybe we'll see some of that.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Yes. We have a video we're going to show you that's going to just go over the overview of the trip. We've kind of done all of our educational classes at this point. We've gone through all the major cities. We've kept it brief because there's a lot of things we're going to be seeing. We're going to have a tour director with us the entire time, and who is going to also bring in local guides who's going to be giving us this information again. We've been doing these just to kind of expose us and just remind a lot of us from our Euro classes and from the different things that we've read and seen. And so all these classes have just been hopefully a little bit of a reminder. We're going to look at a video that's going to show us the overview of where we're going to be going so we can kind of get an idea of the outline of where we're traveling, how we're going to be traveling, and then we'll talk a little bit more after that. And I did not pull it up. Miss McCarran, do you remember how you sent that to me? The video?
When was the evening one? Was that on the March 26th? I don't know that I sent it. It's in the Dropbox.
Sorry to have to do this right now. There we go.
Is it in your Dropbox?
I think you sent me the link to it.
Okay.
No, it's not. Do you mind logging in? Sorry, I thought that I had this already up. We also did get some flight information. There's a few things that are going to be changing, but we did get the flight information for the trip. As soon as I have that nailed down, I will be sharing that with you. We're going to be going in 2 different waves. The waves for the most part are people who are going to Vienna and people who are not. So some of us will be flying out right around noon of the 20th. I think for the most part that's the people who are not going to Vienna. And you'll be flying, I think if I remember correctly, from Tallahassee to Miami and then to Amsterdam and then to Berlin. For those of you who are going to Vienna, you leave I think right around 5-ish. I have to go back and check the exact times, let you know. But we'll be flying out a little bit later. But we're meeting up pretty much the same, arriving within an hour of each other, I believe, in Berlin. They just, because of the numbers, because of the different
like, why would we end up being the same time? Like,
Longer layover. with
so
somebody,
ours is
maybe
more
we-
of our direct flight if we're going to Vienna.
Yes.
So we're going to, we go to Amsterdam as well?
Yes, we also go to Amsterdam, but we fly in on a separate flight, so.
Does the non-Vienna people go into Amsterdam also? Or are they?
I believe so. I have to go back and check though. There's a few things that are gonna be changing, they're gonna be tweaking. So as soon as it's confirmed down,
I thought one was Paris.
and one's on the flying back. There's a few different things.
It's all, it'll be
It's
clear.
being confirmed, it is,
But the bulk are going on the same flight over.
we have about 15 flying to Miami, and then the other 25 will be flying to Atlanta. So, as soon as I have that, I'll get to, are we, the volume's not low? Unless you want to narrate it now.
No, because I didn't rewatch it.
Alright.
I'm not gonna be able to do it.
We take off for our summer adventure on the 20th of June from Tallahassee to, most likely, Atlanta Hartsfield. The flight from Atlanta to Berlin is 10 hours, and so this will be a day of travel. We'll meet up with other flights, and they fly in packs of 15 or 27 planes crossing the Atlantic. Once we arrive in Berlin, it's day 2, and you can see on this map that while we're on a 10 or a 12-day journey, we really have 8 or 10 nights. We'll spend 2 nights in Berlin, 2 nights in Prague, which is in the Czech Republic, 2 nights in Krakow in Poland, 2 nights in Budapest, and those extending the journey will spend 2 nights in Vienna. Once we arrive and we are settled, we're going to set out for Berlin and see. We have pretty much.
Sorry, I was trying to expand it.
We take off for our summer adventure on the 20th to Berlin is 10 hours, and so this will be a day of travel.
Sorry.
Day 2. And you can see on this map that while we're on a 10 or a 12-day journey, we really have 8 or 10 nights. We'll spend 2 nights in Berlin, 2 nights in Prague, which is in the Czech Republic, 2 nights in Krakow in Poland, 2 nights in Budapest, and those extending the journey will spend 2 nights in Vienna. Once we arrive and we are settled, we're going to set out for Berlin and see. We have pretty much most of one day and all of another to see sites such as Unter den Linden, a main passageway, the Reichstag, the Capitol building of, Parliament building of Germany. But you can see from the map, too, that we're going to be in all different parts of central Berlin as we see the sites that are iconic ones for Berlin and for the world. The Brandenburg Gate is one that most people have seen in images before. The Kudamm, which is a street that's known for shops, and also the United Bears, where there are hundreds of bears displayed, such as those. At the end of the Kudamm, we have the Kaiser Wilhelm Church, that some say is the lipstick in the compact. We'll pass by markers where the Berlin Wall is as we enjoy Berlin. Day 4, we set out for Prague in the Czech Republic. But along the way, we'll stop in Dresden, Germany, a community noted for fine porcelain and restoring its city after the devastation of carpet bombing and a firestorm that destroyed 15 square miles of the center city. After Dresden, we're going to then traverse to Prague. Prague is in the Czech Republic. It's the capital city. Here we'll see buildings that show the city and give it its nickname, the City of Bridges. You can see the river wrapping around the central city, and it has numerous bridges, possibly the most notable one, the Charles Bridge. As we look at other architectural and artistic and cultural scenes such as St. Vitus's Cathedral, we'll have this opportunity to explore the lifestyle of then and now in Prague. Day 6 sees us leaving Prague to visit Olmec in the Czech Republic on our way to Krakow. Shortly before arriving in Krakow, we'll stop at Auschwitz-Birkenau, one of the concentration camps, death camps from the World War II, and then travel the next hour to settle into Krakow that night. In Krakow, we'll have the opportunity to explore the uniqueness of that city and the built up on a hill, Wawel Hill, and visit the cathedral that is now a museum where art, especially Da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, is housed. And so we will prep for that before we start on our next journey, which will be probably our longest day. Day 8, we set out from Krakow heading towards Budapest. To do this, we have to leave Poland, cross through Slovakia, and then into Hungary, so that we can come to this city that is separated by the Danube, with the community of Buda on one side and Pest on the other. Here, we'll be able to see relics such as St. Stephen's hand that's stored in a castle, the Fisherman's Bastion, the capital of the city, again exploring the culture and the art and architecture of this community. Some of our band will leave on the 9th, 10th day from here, while others will journey on to Vienna. Vienna in Austria brings us to some of the most iconic buildings, such as the Rathaus, that town hall that's the backdrop in so many cities. Schönbrunn Castle, which is world-renowned, and the artistry and sculpture that we'll see places, as well as possibly the most famous, the Vienna Opera House. On day 12, the last of our band will leave Vienna and make our return flight.
All right.